Hi, my name is Andrea Troxel. I'm the 8th grade science CTL at Uplift Infinity Middle School. This video is about how to use notebooks in your classroom. I use a combination of interactive notebook strategies and Cornell-style note-taking. There are three major goals today in this video. One is to teach you some of the reasoning behind using interactive notebooks and Cornell-style notes. The second is how to set up notebooks in your classroom and have your scholars using them from day one. And the last is to overcome that hurdle of how to manage it in your classroom and make sure your scholars stay organized. First of all, why even choose notebooks? Some of you probably already have a system in place in your classroom using binders. But there's some things that we already know doesn't really work for helping kids retain information. Giving them copies doesn't work. It would be great if I could give you a textbook and you could read it and all of a sudden you remember everything and you're a genius. But we know that doesn't work. We can't just give them copies of the vocabulary words and hope they're going to somehow absorb that. Writing it down. Writing things down one time doesn't help you remember them. If you write down a grocery list and then forget the list at home, are you going to remember everything on it? Probably not. So just the act of writing it down isn't enough to help you really retain the information. And lastly, looking at it one time. You have to see things multiple times in order for you to be able to remember them. And so if you use a binder system where you give them copies of worksheets and they fill in the blanks and they never go back and look at those worksheets again, you're not really helping your scholars remember everything they need to remember about your class. First of all, scholars do need to take notes. The act of writing helps with retention because the brain is looking at the words, processing the words, and then outputting the words with mechanical skill onto a sheet of paper. Those multiple processes in the brain help them remember. The next best way to help with retaining the information is to use the notes in some way. If all they did is copy things down, they're not going to remember it. But if they use those notes and perform something with those notes or answer questions using those notes, then that's going to help them out. Point of fact, the least effective memorization tool is taking a picture. So anytime you see any of those college classrooms where everybody holds up their phone and they take a picture of the PowerPoint slide the professor has up there, they pretty much guarantee they're going to forget it. For those of us who have grown up with cameras, which is everybody in my generation, your brain knows that you're going to take a picture of it. It doesn't need to remember the information because there's already a recording of the information. So there's two major parts to the notebooks that I use. There's the interactive notebooking and the Cornell-style notes. Interactive notebooking really emphasizes the process of thinking through problems. It's not just a place to write down information, but it's a place to use that information. There's a big component of reflection in interactive notebooks. For example, if we were going to do a lab about chemical reactions, a great interactive notebook strategy would be to have the kids write down what they think a chemical reaction is and then do one in class. And now, how has your thinking of what a chemical reaction is changed based by what we've experienced in class? That's developing critical thinking skills and making them more aware of their thought process throughout their learning. And by being aware, they're going to be able to better learn. The other part of a notebook includes the input and output. Traditionally, an interactive notebook has the input on the right side and the output on the left side. Input would be the things that I give you to put into your notebook, right? So that would be all your notes. And then the output would be all your process information. And so the right side of the notebook would be the input because that matches the left side of your brain functions. So I know we've all taken little like left brain, right brain, and which brain are you? And those things aren't really that accurate. Kind of like, you know, if you're a Taurus, does that mean you have certain personality characteristics because you're born in a certain month? Probably not. But there have been a lot of brain studies about the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain and their functions. So if I give scholars information to put on their right side of their notebook, which goes with the left side of their brain, because your brain hemispheres control the opposite side of your body. If I have the left side of the brain is details, the right side of the brain is going to process that information and put it in context with your prior knowledge, put it in context with your way of thinking, and create an overall picture of all these details that I as the teacher have given them. You can share some of this information from left brain and right brain studies with your scholars whenever you're talking about introducing interactive notebooks. There have been some very interesting studies with... You can share some of this information about left and right brain with your scholars whenever you introduce interactive notebooks. There have been some very interesting studies done with traumatic brain injuries that affect only one hemisphere of the brain. For example, if somebody has been shot and there's a bullet that's gone through the right side of their brain, they've obviously have right side brain damage. And so the left side of their brain works fine. If you ask that person to draw a picture of a face, then they may draw an eye or a mouth, but it's not really connected to the other pieces of the face. They are just the details kind of floating around. And if somebody who has had traumatic brain injury to the left side of their brain, which means the right side of their brain works fine, they would holistically draw a face. How does the face make them feel? So they would draw something very different than someone who has the detail-oriented side of their brain working. And it takes both of those sides working together in order to create a full picture. The left side of the brain has all the details, and the right side of the brain puts it into a larger context. The other part of the notebooks that I use is Cornell-style note-taking. If you research Cornell-style note-taking, my version may not match exactly their version, but I have altered it so that it fits with my type of notebooking. There are 5 major parts that I use in my notebook. Every page of the notebook has a title, an essential question, notes, study questions, and a summary. A big part of Cornell-style note-taking is the notes are reviewed over 2 or 3 days. You don't just take notes one day and then forget them the next day. You look at them the next day. You look at them the day after that. And so when I'm introducing this to the scholars, I talk about, if I play a song for you once, will you be able to sing it back to me? Probably not. You might be able to get some of the tune, but you're not going to get a whole lot of the lyrics, and you would forget a bunch. But if I played the same song over and over and over again, by the 4th time, you would at least be able to sing the chorus, and you would have more of the tune down. It's the same thing with your note-taking. If you only look at your notes one time, you're likely to forget them. But if you look at your notes 2 or 3 days in a row, then you would have a better time remembering them. Cornell-style notes really focus on organization. It's very strict on what goes where, what things belong in each section of the notes. It even sections off a piece of paper into different parts so that you put the study questions in this part and a summary in this part. This is supposed to help scholars because eventually nobody's going to help them out with this organization. And so their notes aren't going to look like my notes from college, where all I did was write things down in a notebook. And if I needed to go back and find something from a certain lecture, I pretty much had to read my entire notebook to find it. But with the organization inherent in Cornell-style note-taking, they would be able to find whatever topic they're looking for easily to be able to review that. All right, so let's get down to how to make a notebook happen in your classroom. So we'll talk about setting up and organizing. We'll talk about how to use it every day, and I'll give you options of some different colleagues that have used different ways besides the way I've used it. How to incorporate interactive notebooking with your Cornell-style notes, and how to create a system to review your notes over several days, which is part of the Cornell-style note-taking system. I usually introduce our notebooks like our classroom textbooks. Our actual science textbooks I usually send home because they're consumable, and the scholars will do their homework out of that textbook and not bring the textbook back. So in class, we don't have any textbooks that we use. We need to make our own. And one of the first things you have in any textbook is a table of contents. I suggest you make a table of contents with 1 page per quarter. So you can see in my example here, it says quarter 1 table of contents. Make sure they write the title and the page number. You may want to have them put the date. As you can see in my example, I always start with the date, and I have like really high hopes of starting with the date, and I never make it past like September. And I tell the scholars, because I can never remember, then I'm not going to require them to do it either. But if they can do it, more power to them, because theirs is going to be more organized than mine is. One of the other options you can do, and if you look up interactive notebooking, you'll see this, is they split the page in half, and they have an input side and an output side. I would caution you though, scholars tend to get really frustrated because they can't fit 2 titles on the same line. You can tell by my example here that some of those go more than half of the page. And lastly, as a maximum, think about planning for your year. If you want to use 1 notebook for the whole year, you should use about 23 pages per quarter or less. Now that averages, so if you use 25 one quarter and 20 the other quarter, you're still fine. But if you end up using 30 to 40 pages per quarter, then you're going to run out of pages by the end. I suggest scholars get a 100-page notebook, so that if I use, and I usually average about 20 pages per quarter, then I'm going to use about 80 to 85 pages in a year. If they only get a 70-page notebook, it's not going to work out for them. They need a 100-page notebook. So the general page setup of one of my notebooks looks like the following. I count the whole thing as 1 page. When the scholars number, and you can see it in the bottom left and right hand corner, they number it as left 13 and right 13. So by the end, they'll only have in a 100-page notebook about 96 pages with a left 96 and a right 96. The reason it only goes to 96 is because we've used the first few pages for a table of contents. On the right side, I use the Cornell-style notes, and we'll talk about the little divisions of the page here in a minute. And on the left side, I do reflection and the processing of information. So the first thing I have the scholars do whenever they get their notebooks, other than write their names on it, is to number all of their pages. So they number after their quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4 table of contents. They do left 1, right 1, left 2, right 2, left 3, right 3, and they go through their whole notebook. That's probably their homework for the first day. So let's talk about the right side, which according to interactive notebooking would be our input side, which we're going to use with Cornell-style notes. You would have a line across the bottom and a line along the margin to separate your different parts of your Cornell-style notes. The title's always at the top above the blue line. Your notes go in the middle. It is really important that you stress that the notes only fit within that middle section. If your notes can't fit in that middle section, you're doing too many notes in one day. You have 3 study questions in your left margin and a 2-sentence summary at the bottom. I chose 3 study questions and 2-sentence summary. If you wanted to do 5 study questions and a 3-sentence summary, you could do that as well. Here I am counting up 5 lines from the bottom. I'm using a marker, so this is a way scholars can personalize their notebook. The red line on the left side is usually a little too small for scholars to write in. So I tell them to line up that line inside the holes of the ruler, and you can see it there, to draw their line for their study questions. They only need to draw their lines on the right side pages because the left side is their reflection. The title will always go at the top. This section will be called the notes section every single time. Right here is where they would write their study questions. And at the very bottom, they would have their summary. Our last part of Cornell-style notes is the essential question. Most of the time when you look at Cornell-style notes, they'll have it under the title, but since we have room on the left side margin at the top, I usually put it over there. Another part of Cornell Notes strategies is to review the information. We aren't writing everything on day 1. On day 1, we're writing the title, the essential question, and the notes. The next day, we're going to write the 3 study questions for that page. The day after that, we'll write the 2-sentence summary at the bottom. I have seen teachers successfully insert a day between what I have as day 1 and day 2. So they write their notes the first day, and then the next day they revise, edit, and highlight their notes. So you can make this a 4-day process, but you'd have to teach your scholars how to revise, edit, and highlight their notes. For those of you that need a visual, your essential question and your title I usually give to the scholars on day 1. Their notes and their reflection over here on the left side page would all be on day 1. The next day they would do their study questions, and then the third day they would do their summary. You need to create a system for how your scholars are going to review the information. The system that I use is to have it as a smart start or a do now. At the beginning of class, I would have their regular do now, but I also have posted, you need to complete study questions on page 11 and a summary on page 10. You can tell by the scholar's example that I have here that she wrote her notes in one color and then the next day was using a different pen, so you can see her 3 study questions are different. I have also seen colleagues use it as a daily homework assignment, that when they write their notes today in class, they take their notebooks home and they write their study questions and their summaries. For those of you that need more of a visual, I'm going to pretend like I have class every day. So on Monday, we would write our notes about the scientific method. On Tuesday, part of my smart start would be on page 10 about your scientific method, write your 3 study questions. On Tuesday, we're going to go on to page 11 and talk about planning an experiment. Your scholars can cheat, and they will cheat sometimes and write their study questions at the same time that they're writing their notes. There's no way to really monitor that other than to tell them if they're cheating, the only person they cheat is themselves because they're not using their notebook correctly. On Wednesday, we would go back to page 10, write our summary. We would go to page 11 and write our 3 study questions. And we would go to page 12 and write our notes. On Thursday, we would go back to page 11 and write our summary. We would go to page 12 and write our 3 study questions. And then you would go to page 13 and write today's notes. So you need to come up with a system in your classroom where you can layer this so that they are doing things on multiple pages for multiple days. So what goes on the right side? Of course, any vocabulary or notes that you give to scholars would go on the right side. That's their input. You are giving them the details that they are going to process and put into a larger context along with their background knowledge on the left side. When it comes to labs, because I am a science teacher, I talk about labs. When it comes to labs, their data, and you can see my example here, their data table and their observations would go on the right side because that's their information. And then they're going to process that information on the left side. Your left side, according to the interactive notebook, is your output. One of the things I do want to point out that I do differently than Cornell-style notes is they will put an essential question along with the title on the right side. Because I have the space of the interactive notebook, I put it on the top and on the left. By the way, I have an inquiry-based classroom. That essential question is my objective that I write on the board. So I tell the scholars, if you cannot, by the end of class today, tell me how the structure of an atom determines its properties, I have not done my job as a teacher. Or you fell asleep during class. Some of the things that you could put on there include your checks for understanding, because we usually write great questions and then forget to ask them. That's a lot of information to have on only half a page. So one of the things that I do to help maximize my space is to fold the page in half. Scholars are answering the questions on the front, they're reading together and highlighting the information, and then they're writing their answers on the inside. That way I can get group work, independent work, and my CFU questions all on the left side page. Whenever I have these posted for the scholars, I don't call them CFUs or checks for understanding, I call them thinking questions. They can write reflections, answers to analysis questions, lab conclusions, they can create drawings and interpretations. You could choose 3 of the vocabulary words and draw a picture of what they look like on the left side. You can use a lot of different ways that they're processing their thinking on that left side. The last part of using your notebook every day is to use it for studying. It really is a helpful tool to help them study. For example, if you tell them, I'm going to give you a test over chemistry in 5 minutes, look over your notes, they would have to only read the summary at the bottom of each page in order to find out information they need for their test on chemistry. If they come across a summary and they don't remember what it means, then they would stop and read the whole rest of the page. Because otherwise, scholars will just stare at their page and not know what the heck to do whenever they're studying. Another thing they can do is they'll partner up and ask each other their study questions. They already took the time to write study questions in there. So they would just ask each other, what are the different properties of an atom? And their partner tells them. This is also a way to get parents involved in studying. Parents don't remember all this information from way back in middle school, but they can read the study question, how do you find the mass of an atom? The answer should be right there in the notes section. Lastly, if you don't have a partner, you can always cover up the notes yourself and ask yourself the questions, and the answer should be in your notes section. So let's talk about all those hurdles that would keep you from being able to have an excellent notebook in class. First of all, scholars are minimalists. If you ask them to write 3 study questions, their study questions are going to be, what is a proton, what is a neutron, what is an electron? Which didn't take a whole lot of thought process to be able to write those study questions. They're not really using their notebook to come up with good study questions, because all they had to do is pick out 3 vocabulary words and they're done. So I tell them to think about, if I'm going to give you a quiz about this page, what kind of questions would I ask? Usually they admit, I wouldn't ask, what is a proton, what is a neutron, what is an electron? I tell them to think of 1 easy, 1 medium, and 1 hard level question, and to put those as your 3 questions. There was a history teacher I worked with who told scholars they could only use how or why questions. I could see you adapting that to having they could use 1 how or why question on each page, or make sure they have at least 1 how or why question. I've also run into a problem of what a summary means. I'll start reading scholar summaries, and their summaries will say something like, we took notes today, or we did a lab today. When we're talking about summary, yes, that is a summary of what happened today, but that's not the type of summary I mean. I mean an informational summary, not a summary of your feelings or what you did, but a summary of the notes, because this is your notebook. So the scholars that are having a hard time writing a summary, I tell them to answer their questions. They already have 3 study questions on that page. I already gave them an essential question on that page. There are 4 questions on that page where all they have to do is write a couple complete sentences answering those questions, and they have a good summary. The next part of organization is fitting it all on the right page. I say right twice in a row for a reason. Not only does it need to be on the correct page, page number 12 or 13 or 14, but it needs to fit on the right side of page 12 or 13 or 14. Just like any textbook, if I open it to page 157, everybody's page 157 should have the same information on that. So our notebooks, if I tell you to open it up to page 23, everybody's page 23 should have the same information on it. Just because you write bigger or smaller doesn't mean you can fit it on different pages. If you're not sure, the easiest way to see if it's going to fit in those 20 lines that are available on the notebook is to write your own notebook first. If you can't fit it on 20 lines, the kids can't fit it on 20 lines either. I'm saying 20 lines because if you use a wide rule notebook and count up 5 from the bottom to make your summary line, they have about 20 lines for their note section. If scholars run out of just a little bit of room and they need one more line, no, they cannot use the summary space to finish up their last line. If you have really big writers, or if a scholar gets really overzealous and is skipping lines between every vocabulary word, even though you told them there's not room to do that, they could glue another page in the bottom. So what I did here is I just took another notebook, cut the top off so that there's no margin. You would just put a little strip of glue across the top and put that glue down there where the summary section goes. That way your scholar has room to continue writing their notes, and then they'd put their new summary at the bottom, fold it up, and everything fits nice and neatly back in their notebook. You can have a reference section in the back. This is especially useful for math and science, where they're given reference materials on their STAR test but forget to look at them. And so scholars are sitting there trying to figure out how many protons are in carbon and totally forget there's a periodic table given with every test. So if you want to train them to be looking things up and looking things up and looking things up, give them a spot to look things up. Some commonly used things in the reference materials would include a periodic table, a formula chart. You can put your levels of questioning back there. You may have rubrics on how you're going to grade lab reports or how you're going to grade CERs. You can have a list of all the TEKs that'll be covered this year or covered on the STAR test. Those are some common things you can put in reference pages in the back, but you could probably come up with some more. So here's one of the pages that I have with the levels of thinking, a periodic table, and then the formula chart. So a couple tips to stay organized. Keep your own notebook. Scholars will be absent. It's a lot easier to deal with, "Hey miss, I was absent yesterday," if my answer could be, "Go grab my notebook and copy down the notes you missed." So by keeping your own notebook, one, you're helping yourself because you can remember what the heck you did next year. And then two, you're helping your scholars stay organized by them seeing your notebook and how you set it up. If you're like my school, the theater teacher, the English teacher, and the science teacher were all using notebooks the same year once. And so I would find random theater notebooks stuck in with the science notebooks. So make sure that you avoid those mix-ups by putting their full name on the front. They should put their class. You might have them also put your name, their grade, put science on there. So if that notebook gets lost anywhere in school, they can return it to you or return it to the scholar so that they don't lose their work. Another tip for staying organized is to write their names on the sides. If your notebooks looked like the stack on the left, imagine what it would be like if you had 30 black notebooks. Only one kid would be able to find their notebook easily, and it's that one that bought a blue notebook. Everybody else is going to have to waste time looking for their notebook. What I've had my scholars do is I give them a little strip of Scotch brand masking tape. No, Scotch is not paying me to say this. If you buy some cheaper masking tape, it will peel off more easily. So Scotch brand is the best for staying and staying all year. I give scholars a selection of permanent markers, 3 or 4 per table. Your job is to write your name and decorate your strip of masking tape and then put that masking tape on the spine of your notebook. You can see some examples I have there, and nobody has to sit there flipping through all the notebooks, reading the front of all of them. Another way you can stay organized is to use different colors of duct tape. I like to stay color coded. My first period is red, my second period is orange, my third period is yellow, my fourth period is green, my fifth period is blue, my sixth period is purple. So to help minimize scholars that put notebooks in the wrong spot, lose their notebooks, forget which class period they're in, I use colored duct tape to indicate which class period is which. So I have spots on my shelf with purple duct tape. This notebook has purple duct tape on it. Even though the colors are a little off on my pictures, that's the same notebook. So I have purple duct tape at the top and the bottom. And then if you open the notebook, you can see that I have the class rules taped to the inside. And oh wait, there's a special part. Those class rules are really a pocket. So if I come across something that we didn't finish today, we could just fold it up, stick it in the pocket, and scholars aren't going to lose it before next class. This was really useful when I had classes every single day and we weren't able to finish a lab in one day. Now that I have block scheduling, I don't use the pockets anymore and I don't use this system as much. The art teacher at my school also uses colored duct tape, but she puts the colors of duct tape on the spine of her books. So you can tell her 1B class is green, and the notebooks that are stacked up on her shelf there, 2 of the notebooks belong to 1B. The orange, the purple, and the blue notebook should be on a different shelf. Scholars will be children, and they'll take somebody else's notebook and put it on the wrong shelf. So that somebody comes up and is worried because now they can't find their notebook. If there's a color of duct tape on the side, you can easily tell, oh look, this green one's in the wrong spot, and be able to give it to the scholar because somebody just stuck it in the wrong shelf trying to be funny. And lastly, let them add some personal touches. Putting the masking tape on the side is a nice way to have a personal touch. Also, the first page I use as a title page. I don't start the quarter 1 table of contents to the back side of that page. You can allow kids to draw whatever they want on that page, or I have a little science getting to know you activity, you can see an example there, that I do on the first day of class. And so I'll pick those up and then give them back to them when they have their notebooks to put on the first page. One of the things that I added this year was a file folder rubber band that I attached to the back through a hole punch. All I did was hole punch and thread it through. If the scholars ever took their rubber band off, I got to keep it, so that minimized them hitting each other with rubber bands. But it helps keep the notebook closed. The other thing I added were some tabs on the side. So my first tab goes with chemistry, which is our first unit. My next tab goes with physics, which is our second unit. The next tab goes with earth science, which is our third unit. The next tab goes with space, which is our fourth unit. And then the last tab goes with life science, which is our fifth unit. So I had one tab for every unit, and then it conveniently stays closed by using the file folder rubber band. So that ends the video about using interactive notebooks in your classroom. If you have any questions, you're welcome to email me at atroxel@uplifteducation.org. I again am Andrea Troxel, the 8th grade science CTL at Uplift Infinity. Thank you.